it appears to me that love is far more than that. But like I said, then you run into questions like, what are things like justice? What is truth?
Yeah.
If there is no mind prior to the human mind,
Well, that's just your truth, man.
whatever that is,
Right.
I haven't defined it.
Right. Exactly.
So. And welcome to our very first episode of the Identity Christ Is podcast. I am your host. Well, one of the hosts. I'm a co-host. My name is Jalen Thompson.
I'm Dylan Schweitzer.
Dylan, of course, as always, pleasure to work with you, man.
Absolutely.
This is our first episode of this podcast, man. So I guess what we better do is first tell people kind of the groundwork for what we're trying to do and what we're looking to build here. So this is a Christian apologetics podcast, I should say. And our goal is to essentially spread biblical truth to the world from the perspective of one person who's kind of always been in the faith and another who has not always been in the faith.
Yeah.
But we're looking to just provide truth in a logical and rational sense that we can communicate that points people toward the gospel.
Absolutely.
Ultimately.
And along the way, we also want to clarify a lot of the misconceptions that we hear about theism, specifically Christianity. I think that's a giant thing, all of these false concepts that we hear about Christianity, like the God of the Bible who condones slavery and is a racist, and I have to work my way into heaven, and all of these silly and blatantly false things that we hear pretty often.
Right, absolutely. And I think our goal here, man, is we're going to talk about some topics that you won't necessarily hear on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
We're going to address some conversations that you probably won't hear much about over the pulpit. You'll probably get it in snippets over the pulpit, but it definitely won't be a back and forth about it and considering different perspectives. And we'll address questions like, if God is just, why does evil exist? Why Jesus is opposed to Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism? What's up with this abortion stuff?
Right.
A lot of that. We're going to talk about a lot of those uncomfortable topics, but we're going to talk about them and address them from a Christian, Judeo-Christian worldview and biblical perspective. We're also going to address other worldviews as well and their perspectives.
Yeah, kind of weigh the evidence, see what evidence leads you to what worldview.
And we're going to go from there.
Absolutely.
But before we do that, I think the first question that we have to answer, Dylan, is before we get into different worldviews and all of that stuff, I think first we have to address the question of, does God exist?
Absolutely.
Right? I think that's the very first question that needs to be addressed here, because the answer to that question, or wherever the evidence point, or wherever the evidence points us, that's gonna paint a picture for us. If there is a God at all. If there is no God at all, then the Judeo-Christian worldview, the Islamic worldview, Hinduism, even Buddhism to a degree, but they don't matter.
Right.
So
kind of stops right there.
Exactly. So there are implications behind the answer to that question, and I think we need to kind of start off with addressing that first.
Absolutely. And I think a great way to look at that is to look at different evidences on its behalf. Right. I think one clarification I think is important when you're kind of investigating what is true about something is understanding the difference between proof and the difference between evidence. Rarely in our lives do we live we live according to proof.
Right.
We usually live on things based on according to evidence.
Right.
And I think with a lot of things, it's a cumulative case, especially the case for the existence of God. So I don't think one individual evidence or one individual argument on behalf of a creator is really strong on its own. It could be compelling or convincing, but it's when you line up all the evidences together. A good analogy might be in like a court case. You might find a gun at the murder scene.
Right.
Cool. Doesn't really say anything. Okay. Individually, you could find another piece of evidence like a little bit of a suspect's DNA or blood or something.
Sure.
Cool. By itself, that doesn't really tell us a whole lot.
You find a shoe.
Great.
Exactly.
Shoo, that doesn't really do anything for us.
Right. That was a terrible joke, but go ahead.
Thank you. But when you stack up, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or however many pieces of evidence that all point to the same thing, you kind of get into this territory where it starts to get unreasonable to say, yeah, so what? Where you either have to formulate a different explanation for the evidence,
Right.
which I think is the strongest thing. Because just saying, yeah, so what, I don't really care, I think on some level is intellectually dishonest.
It is. Most
anything.
Definitely. Right. You have a point. Yeah. And so that's kind of what we're looking to do here today, right? Is look at some individual pieces of evidence for God, but when we accumulate them together, we get a bigger picture. And we're not going to go through all of the evidences for God today, right? Yeah. We'll be here for 2 days doing that.
Right.
But we have about 8 pieces of evidence that we're going to go through. And then we're gonna talk about each one a little bit, kind of go back and forth about them, and kind of just move through the list. And then I know also too, this video is gonna go up on YouTube. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Identity Christ Is podcast on YouTube. Please like and subscribe, follow us. Yeah, Dylan got his shirt on, I got my shirt on, so follow us on YouTube, as well as like our Facebook page as well. A lot of this content, this video content, is gonna go up there. We have a nice little following on Facebook.
Yeah, it's coming along.
Yeah, it's coming along. We got like just under 400 followers on Facebook.
That's pretty good for little to no videos to start with.
Yeah, exactly. So we've been doing a lot of written content, a lot of pictures and stuff like that. But kind of posting, what our podcast is about, and kind of some apologetic arguments, and some evidences for God, the resurrection, all that different stuff. And so we'll be posting a lot of our video content there, as well as on YouTube. But let's get into some of these evidences, man. So you want to kick us off?
Let's kick it off. So I think one of the most debated things we could talk about is the cause of the universe. So as most of us knew, probably growing up in school, we talked about the Big Bang, right? And so pretty much all scientists today confirm that the universe had a beginning, that space, time, and matter had a beginning. And so therefore, if space and time and matter had a beginning, the cause can't really be made of those sort of things. So this cause would have to be spaceless, it would have to be timeless, and have to be immaterial.
Right.
The cause would also have to be intelligent to be able to create such a finely tuned universe, which we'll get a little bit more in depth in a little bit about that, and powerful to be able to create something so massive. And so when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, intelligent, powerful source, it kind of leads us to some sort of intelligent creator to some sense.
Absolutely. And something else too that is in regards to space, time, and matter, that's what the universe being made up of. I know Einstein's theory of general relativity, he actually discovered that space, matter, and time had to come together in existence simultaneously, that they all had to come into existence together at the same time. That's a really big deal, because if you had space and matter but no time, when would you put it?
Right.
If you had time and matter, where would you put it?
Yeah.
Right. So that's a really big deal, that they all had to come together into existence at the same time.
Absolutely. And I think a little small disclaimer, this may not get you directly to the Christian God specifically, but it does get you to some sort of intelligent creator. And again, you might kind of see that with some of these evidences. Again, they aren't always pointing directly to the Christian God. But I don't think that's really the point today necessarily. But that being said, this does line up astonishingly well with the very first verse of the Old Testament. In the beginning, time, God created the heavens, space, and the earth, matter. And then, just shortly after that, let there be light. Bang. And actually, there are several, what's the word? Nobel Peace-winning physicists. Like, there's at least 3 or 4 that all confirm. One of them actually, and this is pretty much a quote from the guy, said, if all he had to go off of was the Old Testament, or specifically the first chapter of Genesis, the Big Bang is exactly what he would have predicted.
That's pretty incredible. And then also too, kind of going back to Einstein, because that theory of general relativity is a really big deal as it relates to the universe having a beginning. Because Einstein actually used to be a pantheist.
Mm.
He thought the universe was eternal
Mm-hmm.
for a long time, and he was kind of devout in that
Yeah.
belief, to the point where even in his calculations when he was looking at the universe, he had a little fudge factor in it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he did. He had a little fudge factor in it that kind of allowed him to ignore the fact that the universe had a beginning, because he understood the implications of it. If the universe has a
Oh,
beginning,
wow. So you had to
then
kind of overcome his bias a little bit.
exactly,
Oh, that's
and
fascinating.
it got found out. He got called out on it, and he openly admitted that, hey, I had a little fudge factor in there. He ended up taking it out, and that's actually when he converted to theism.
Interesting.
Yeah, now I'm not sure if he believed in the Christian God, or what,
Mm-hmm.
what is God like. I don't know if he had an answer to that question,
Sure.
but he most certainly deconverted from pantheism and converted to
Some form
theism.
of theism or deism. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Anything else on
I mean, I guess that's a good chunk of this stuff. I guess a
Yeah.
small disclaimer: we're going to throw some links in the description of this video.
Right.
Obviously, we don't expect to lay out the full argument in its fullest depth and counter every single objection that
Right.
people give to this argument. I mean, people make 40, 50, 60-minute videos just on one sort of piece of evidence for God. But we think it'd be nice to provide a couple of links for each argument. And in the future, we're going to make full podcast episodes discussing these different arguments, common objections to these different pieces of evidence and arguments and stuff like that. But if you want to give us our next piece of evidence.
Yeah, I got one. So I guess keeping in line then with the universe having a beginning and cause and all of that. If the universe had a beginning, then life itself had a beginning, right? And so actually, I would say another piece of evidence for God is the fact that life comes from life. In my experience, I don't know about yours, but in my experience, I have never seen life come from non-life, ever. I've always seen human life create more human life. I'm a father, so I actually participated in that process. Yeah, I know that works for a fact. Human life creates human life. Plant life creates plant life, and I've seen animal life create animal life.
Right.
And so it only makes sense if I were to rewind it back to if I were to rewind life back to the origin, that I would at some point or another, I would have to find the life somewhere, and on atheism, I have to depart with my experience of reality to come to the conclusion that in the beginning there was no life, and then life happened.
Yeah.
And it's been sustaining itself ever since.
I think it's really interesting because if you were to really boil down a lot of the worldviews you have out there, in its very extreme, simplest form, you either have mind created matter or matter created mind.
Right.
And I think that's a really big thing to consider.
It's a huge thing to consider. Yeah, and so the difficulty on atheism is I have to accept the fact that at the origin of life, there was nothing. And then life was created by nothing. Even though I've never experienced it in my life ever since. It happened at the beginning of time, and it hasn't happened ever since. That's really hard for me to follow.
Sure.
It becomes a question of what's more reasonable to believe.
Sure.
Is it more reasonable to believe that at the origin of life there was something that created life and then sustained it, or is it more reasonable for me to believe that nothing created life and sustains it?
Or another fun way of wording it is no one took nothing for no reason, for no purpose whatsoever, and created everything. Or an intelligent source created everything for a purpose with intrinsic value for each purpose and person.
Exactly.
And I think the first one I laid out, I find it kind of hard to buy, I guess you could say, intellectually. Yeah, that's the end of that thought. There's not really much else to say.
It's not.
I don't mean to straw man which is a fancy way of just saying misrepresent another person's position by any means. But based on how I see it, that's kind of what I feel like I have to accept on an atheistic standpoint. And as a former atheist, once I kind of came to that conclusion on some aspect, it kind of got confusing to me to kind of accept that, you know? Yeah. So, I mean, anything else you wanted to talk about with the second piece of evidence?
No, I think we can. Wait, what else you got? You got another one?
So, another scientific one. that I have here is
scientific.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I like that.
Is the fine tuning of the universe. So I think a really simple way to look at this, without getting into exponential powers and all the crazy math behind it, is to take a 6-sided die, so 1 through 6, and you're at a casino, right? And I roll the dice, I get a 6. Okay, cool. Luck of the draw. I'm doing good. Roll it again. I get a 6. You might think, all right, it's his night. He's doing good.
Yeah, glad I came with that guy.
Yeah, right? I roll another 6. Wow, okay. I roll 6 70 times in a row.
Yeah, somebody go get my revolver. Yeah, that's what's going on here.
So if I rolled the dice 70 times and got the exact same number 70 times in a row, is it more reasonable to conclude that I am just in the one universe where that happened? Or did I load the dice? Like, let's be serious here. What do you think?
I'm going to say you loaded the dice, and I'm going to remove my chips from this table as quickly as possible.
I'm not winning here.
Yeah,
That
that's
ain't
what I'm
happening.
going to do.
That ain't happening. And so this is a great representation of when we look at the different variables that we see that are needed to permit life within the universe.
Yes.
That ratio that I gave, rolling 6 70 times, I think it's something like 10 to the 70th or 10 to the 40th power.
Right.
Giant number. Lots and lots of zeros. There'll be like 40 zeros. And that's several different things, like the gravitational constant, the expansion rate. I think there's like at least 10 different ones. But all of those have to be fine-tuned to such a specific degree to even allow life to occur.
Absolutely.
And then when you think about each individual one, let's say we'll just throw random numbers out there. One's 10 to the 40th, one's 10 to the 30th, one's 10 to the 70th, so on and so forth.
Right.
Well, all of those have to be in line. So you'd have to bring all those numbers together then. And that is a giant number. And I think it's, again, a little intellectually dishonest just to say we're lucky.
The scientific term is chance. It is by chance that this universe came to be what it is. By chance, you rolled a 6 70 times in a row, and now you're a millionaire. So
Yeah, jeez. Wish it was that easy.
right. Gotcha. So anything else on that one? I think we're pretty solid.
That's
there.
the chunk of it. Again, we're going to dive more specifically into these arguments in different episodes. I think this one's going to be a lot of fun because there's a few objections to this one that I'm familiar with, like the puddle analogy and special pleading and all of that fun stuff. Which again, we're just kind of given little soundbite chunks of this stuff to think about. We'll expand upon further. But this one is going to be a lot of fun, I think, to really give a full episode to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess bouncing off of that one, I guess I'll go the scientific route too for my next piece.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll go with the laws of nature. Yeah, I'll go laws of nature.
Okay.
Yeah, I like it. So when we observe nature, we observe the laws of nature, such as the law of gravity, law of motion, laws of thermodynamics, different types of laws.
Sure.
We observe that they are orderly and very consistent, even persistent, one might say.
Sure. Yeah.
And the question becomes, okay, we observe that these laws are orderly and persistent, and consistent. How is it? First of all, why are they like that? And then secondly, I'm convinced that we discover these laws. We don't make these laws.
Correct. Yeah, I would agree with that.
These laws get discovered. So then the question becomes, where do these laws come from? The laws themselves, not the effects of the laws, but the laws themselves. Where do these laws come from?
And
well, I guess ultimately, from what I understand, my experience of life, I've never seen it happen any other way.
Sure.
Laws come from lawgivers.
Right. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, laws come from lawgivers, and in this particular case, going back to science, right? We can't do science unless the laws of nature are consistent and orderly.
Right.
We can't do science. If the laws of nature changed every 10 minutes, then we can't do science, which is ultimately the study of processes.
Right.
So we can't study a process if the laws of nature change every 10 minutes. We can't do it.
Yeah.
So I would say that that's another evidence that that behind the creation of the universe is a mind, an intelligent mind that created these laws and ordered them in such a way that allow us to discover these laws by doing science. And so that's what.
Yeah, and sustain them in a sense.
And sustain them.
Yeah.
Because these laws don't change. Gravity's been gravity forever.
Right.
Right. Anything else you wanted to add to that?
I mean, I feel like you hit it right on the head.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not really much else to say about it in terms of the context of laws come from lawgivers. You know, when we do science, typically, I mean, I shouldn't say we. I'm not really a scientist, but when the scientists do science,
Everybody's a scientist.
Yeah.
You saw what happened 2 years ago.
Oh, okay.
I shouldn't have said that.
When we reason from effect to cause to try to figure out what the cause is, the concept of laws coming from a lawgiver, I think, is very consistent. And I think that's just something large to consider. And again, that doesn't immediately mean one individual piece of evidence. All of a sudden, you have Yahweh. Right. But I think when you start looking at all these different evidences together, you start to see an image. Well, and I don't mean literally see an image.
Right.
Call a doctor if you start seeing images after this podcast. But
please do.
But trying to look at things like this sort of consistency concept of the laws of nature, is just something I think really big to consider.
Yeah. It's very huge to consider because, like I said, laws come from lawgivers. Last I checked, they come from lawgivers, and so we have to think about where we found these laws. And I've heard an atheist response to this, and where I've heard, this is as crazy as it sounds. I've heard it said that that the laws of nature themselves are what created the universe. Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, what's interesting about it is, once again, I still need a lawgiver. And two, since when are laws creative agents? I thought creative agents were personal beings.
Interesting.
So how can laws create with no personal attributes to them?
And I guess to take that maybe a different route, the concept of being self-creating. It's kind of interesting. So I guess in a sense, if you're saying the laws of nature created the universe, but the laws of nature are contained within the universe, correct? Right?
From what I would understand, so they don't.
So if there was nothing or a small fine point at the beginning of time, how would that really work? Because then you'd have to go to the conclusion that the universe was self-creating. Which, again, if we go back to the concept of experience, your 1-year-old baby was not self-created.
10-month-old.
10-month-old. My apologies.
She's on her way. She's close.
She's coming. Yeah.
She's starting to act like one. That's for sure.
And when you think of any sentient life or anything like that, nothing is really created by itself.
Right.
You know what I mean? It'd be ridiculous if I told you I don't have parents. Not in the sense that they aren't around or anything. It's like, no, I just came into being.
Right.
If things just come into being, if that's possible with the universe, why don't things come into being all the time? Why doesn't an elephant just pop up in my bedroom? Why don't things just pop into existence? But only one time in our existence that's happened? Now, I guess you could bite the bullet and say, well, maybe we just haven't observed it yet. But again, it seems like a real blind faith claim to say, well, I haven't seen it, therefore it's more likely that it's true. Again, intellectually, it's a giant price tag for me to purchase.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I agree with that, man.
So we've been looking out. Let's look a little bit in now. So we've done a few scientific pieces of evidence.
Right.
And I think one thing when I look around within myself, or I look at other people in conversations, or even on a larger scale in society, you hear things like, you should not do that. You can't do that. This is wrong.
As it relates to human behavior, right?
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And so, what you did was wrong. What you did was a good thing. And this implies some sort of standard of morality in a sense. And so my big question on morality is, if there isn't a God, because I like to really look at these arguments or pieces of evidence, however you want to word it, from a strictly naturalistic point of view and try to come up with an explanation for it first, you know? Because if there is no God, I want to hear a good argument for it. I want to hear good evidence for it. And I want to see if it fits the evidence that we do have already. And so if there is this sort of moral code, this sort of standard of morality, where do we ground that? And so, for example, when someone says to do what you did was wrong, on what standard are you using on a naturalistic worldview? You know, a lot of times you'll hear people say...
And they got three options.
And what are they?
Well, the three options I can think of, maybe there are more, but in the naturalistic worldview, we got my standard, we have a societal standard that we've all come to
Mm-hmm.
agree on, and then you got maybe the power elite.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, those with the power. You know, you've heard of the golden rule, haven't you?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It
Whoever,
sounds familiar.
yeah, whoever has the gold makes the rules.
Oh. Oh.
And so, you know, that's all I can think of in a naturalistic worldview
Sure.
in terms of where we would ground
Right.
morality.
So, like, I guess if we were to break through those, because I did think of another one, and the common one that you'll hear is that human flourishing should be the goal, which we'll touch base on that in just a second. But
Sure.
we'll jump through what you said. So, I am the standard. Me, Dylan.
Mhm.
Okay, so now everyone has to go by my standard? That
Sure.
doesn't really make a lot of sense because I'm an infallible human. My mind changes all the time. My favorite food last year was different than this year. What I thought 5 years ago is different. I am changing. I'm not really a constant standard. I'm not consistent.
Well, and more than that, what makes you a different human being than me? Why do we have to go
Yeah.
with it? Why is your standard better than mine?
Right. What makes my say better?
Right.
And I guess if we were to take that to the second one, I believe you said the society overall.
Yeah.
And so I guess the problem with
Maybe
that
your
is
culture.
the culture.
Yeah,
Sure.
sure.
I guess the problem with that, I hate to bring old Hitler up,
Do
but do it. A good exercise to think about with this is let's suppose in World War II Hitler did win the war,
Sure.
and he took over and he was able to brainwash people and convince them that killing and murdering Jehovah's Witnesses, Jews, gays, and gypsies was a good thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Would that make it a good thing because Hitler convinced people that it was? Now, our immediate inclination is, well, no. It's like, well, why not? The society in that scenario is claiming that it was the good thing to do, appealing to some sort of standard.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, intuitively, I hope, at least anyone watching this would say, well, no, that's not good. That's not a good thing. It's not good to kill 6 million people. We look at Stalin, Mao, and Hitler. In just the 20th century alone, we have about roughly 100 million deaths.
Yep.
And so to say, let's say they were like some super team, they took over, they're saying that's the right thing to do. Typically, our inclination, the sort of moral code we have written on our heart, says no.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess the third concept you talked about was the power elite.
Sure.
Well, whoever, I think the humorous concept, whoever has the gold makes the rule.
Yeah.
And so that, again, that's just a power struggle.
Yep.
That doesn't really get you a infallible standard.
No, it's just whoever is in control, you carry the stick.
So the one I've also heard against this is the concept of human flourishing,
That being the standard, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So human flourishing is the standard. Well, typically humans don't like to suffer,
Right.
or humans typically enjoy euphoria and enjoyment and things like that.
Right.
And so we do things to maximize pleasure and minimize pain.
Okay.
And I mean, off the top of your head, what comes to mind when you think about that? Like living out that concept of using, flourishing as the standard.
Well, I guess we have to define flourishing,
Mm-hmm.
and then also too, what comes to my mind is survival of the fittest.
Mm-hmm.
So what comes to my mind, Darwin's theory of evolution, and
Mm-hmm.
the fit survive, and for the ones who are not so fit, well, tough luck.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think of when you say that. But
Sure. When I try to work through that concept where human flourishing is supposed to be the goal, I guess the problem I have with it is that why human flourishing? Why are humans the standard? I mean, if we're looking at it from a strictly evolutionary standpoint, if we're just another animal, why is human flourishing a good thing?
sure.
I mean, especially when you hear from like political people in the political parties and stuff like that. Like some people even say humans are like a cancer on the earth, especially when you look at like environmental agencies and stuff like that. We're actually doing harm to the earth. Why not promote bunny flourishing or
Sure.
whale flourishing? Like why are humans at the top of the chain? That seems a little speciesist in a sense.
Yeah, and like I said, I think we also arrived to at the question of who gets to define human flourishing.
Right.
Who gets to define what this looks like? Is human flourishing look like the power elite making all
Sure.
the rules for everyone else,
Right,
and,
right.
and those without the money or without the power, you just follow their rules. What does that look like? Does that look like the Jim Crow South of the 70s? Oh,
Right.
not I was going to say 70s, the 50s and 60s.
I hope it wasn't that recently.
You know, right?
Someone didn't inform me.
Right. You know, what exactly does that? What does that flourishing look like?
Oh, I have an idea.
Oh, go ahead.
It could be people with blonde hair and blue eyes, and people who don't conform to that image, we just kill them. And in fact,
Okay.
to maximize human flourishing, what we could do is we just kill everyone else. And if you don't agree with us, we kill you because we are trying to elevate the human species and actually make the human species flourish better. And I think we know who had that plan. Hitler.
I knew it sounded familiar.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's convenient for me because I have blonde hair and blue eyes, but
I'm screwed.
but that's the problem. It's like whenever I hear the human flourishing argument, it seemed like on that argument, Hitler was doing the right thing, but that goes 100% against this moral code that's written on our heart that it's wrong to kill people.
Well, what's interesting is the Nuremberg trials that took place as a result of the Holocaust, when I think it was 24 Nazi officers who were tried.
Sure.
And they were arrested and tried for war crimes that they did with the Holocaust. And their lawyers were brilliant because their lawyers actually appealed to this moral relativism that's defined by culture. Their argument was, hey, guys, you can't hold them accountable for just following rules that were set by those with the power. That my guys were just following the rules. They didn't do anything wrong. They were just following the culture.
Right.
And it was brilliant on their part because the trial actually stopped as a result of that, right? Yes. So it was brilliant on their part. The trial halted. There was, these guys are going to walk away scotch-free from this until I believe the guy's name is Robert Jackson. He was an American U.S. He was an American U.S. attorney. Okay, he's American. He's U.S. He was an American attorney who came in and said, wait a second, time out. There is a law above the law of the land or above the law of the culture that says that what you guys did with these concentration camps is absolutely objectively wrong. And that argument actually kicked the Nuremberg trials back into gear. They were tried and they actually were convicted of their war crimes as a result of that.
Wow. So they appealed to a consistent standard above and beyond humanity.
Right.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
So I think that's something really strong to consider with the concept of moral realism is the fancy term, just saying there are objective moral duties or laws or rules that humans are to abide by in some sense.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, anything else you wanted to add to that, or?
No. I think we kind of hit it on the head there. I think the issue with that one is if morality is not grounded in theism, then it's relative and it's objective. It's relative and objective only to individual persons.
Yeah.
And the issue with that is, we run around saying, in my opinion,
over and over,
this is wrong. In my opinion, that was wrong. And when you try to live that out, what you're going to run into is, let's say someone breaks into your house. You aren't going to say, hey, buddy, in my opinion, you shouldn't have broken into my home.
No, you're going to say what you did was wrong. Don't break into stealing is wrong.
Absolutely wrong.
Not like, hey, I'd prefer if you didn't take stuff that I've currently claimed.
Yeah, just between you and I, can I have it back? No, you're not going to do that. You're going to call the police. You're going to file police reports. You're going to press charges. You're going to do all this stuff because I think it's going to strike a chord with you and your conscience that your dignity has been violated.
Sure.
And the only way that that's real in an objective sense is if moral absolutes are grounded in theism.
Absolutely.
It's the only way.
And I think a lot of times people can be intellectually naturalistic.
Sure.
But they're not necessarily living it out to its fullest extent.
Absolutely.
And I think that a lot, where when I was an atheist for a good portion of my life and transitioning to back and forth between atheist and agnostic at another point, that was one thing I kind of had to face where I'm like, well, if there is no God or nothing transcended, there is only just the natural world, there's a lot of things that you kind of lose.
Right.
That could jump into a whole other rabbit hole, but specifically to the concept of objective morality, everything is just opinion-centric because we are just on an infinitesimal small speck of dust in the giant universe. in a finite area.
Call it the cosmos. That sounds a lot cooler.
Yeah. The cosmos.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
We need Carl Sagan to hop on here just for that little soundbite.
Exactly.
But we are just a small speck in a giant cosmos that is going to just end in about 4 to 8 billion years in the heat death of the universe. So everything is just, irrelevant on a larger scale.
I thought you were going to say 4 to 8 hours. Oh, I was going to get really upset.
There goes my Saturday plans.
Right.
But anyways, I think we've kind of nailed the coffin in the head, if that's how you say that phrase, the moral.
Probably.
Let's go with it.
Let's go with it, man.
Let's go with it. So, I mean, that's a little bit of the moral absolute. So we kind of went out for the first few arguments, and we're kind of starting to go a little bit more inward.
Yeah. And so speaking of going inward, actually another piece of evidence for the existence of God, I believe, is the problem of evil.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So there are two ways that I think this needs to be addressed, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the problem of evil, it's first of all, it is a question that at some point or another plagues the mind of every man and woman walking this planet at some point or another. There are 4 questions that we're all going to ask ourselves. Why am I here? What is the meaning of my life? Mm-hmm. How should I live while I'm here? And what happens to me when I die?
Right.
That's every man and woman is going to ask that question at some point.
Absolutely.
And the problem of evil falls under the "how should I live while I'm here" category.
Sure. Okay, that's a good way of thinking of it.
And it is something that we all observe in every worldview should.
It's at least addressed. Yeah.
And so the 2 ways I want to kind of address this is I want to give a logical answer for those who have a logic centric issue with evil, and then an emotional answer.
Absolutely.
Because you just can't leave it. You can't leave it without the both of them. I think they kind of go hand in hand. So the logical answer to the problem of evil. So when you say evil, you are assuming that there is good, because good is the standard by which we address evil.
Right.
Good is the standard. Anything that falls underneath the standard of good is what we call evil.
Yeah, and actually, a quick side note, a good way to think about that is if we take a car, something we consider a good or a necessity, a good thing to have, and there's rust on it, we consider rust to be bad.
Right.
But you can't really have rust without the good. So there isn't really bad without good.
Exactly. Evil is behavior or conduct absent of goodness.
Absolutely.
That's what evil is. So we have to address that first. That when we observe evil, we are saying that this conduct is absent of goodness. So then that begs the question: where do we get goodness from?
Sure.
Right. And then that begs the question: once we observe that we are assuming that there is a moral law that we derive this goodness from. Then it becomes a question of, okay, well, if there's a moral law, there is a moral lawgiver.
Sure.
Who is that? And we know that, once again, lawgivers are personal, are personal beings. And in this case that we're talking about, in the grand scheme of things, we're talking about a moral lawgiver being God, and that being where we get goodness from.
Right.
Where goodness and things like justice and other intangible values like that are derived from. Now, that's the logical answer. Okay, that's the logical answer. If there's evil, there's good. If there's good and evil, there is a moral law. There's a moral law, there's a moral lawgiver.
Yeah, and I think to bounce off the intellectual analysis of it, if you will, I think it's really important to consider that on a naturalistic framework, it's kind of hard to say something is evil. I mean, because again, if there isn't really a standard, it's just your opinion versus my opinion. There's not really a standard to say what you did was right or wrong, like we kind of talked about with the moral evidence, the previous point.
Right.
And so if everything is just subjective, how can there be an objective evil that's going on, Right. Especially if we're just like another animal here, right?
Right.
A dolphin doesn't rape another dolphin.
Right.
It forcibly copulates.
Right.
A lion doesn't murder a gazelle. It kills the gazelle.
Nor do lions commit infanticide.
Right.
But it's not infanticide for them.
Right. It's just lunch.
Yeah. Or it's just an intruder who, because from what I understand, with lions, you have a male lion who's the head of a pride, and he has a host of female lions, and they bear children.
Sure.
Well, when another male lion comes in and takes over that pride, usually what happens is he kills the babies. Yeah, he usually kills the babies of the previous male lion, and then he sleeps with the lionesses that are there, and gets them pregnant, and now they bear that lion's children.
Well, that's a fun fact.
But because animals are not moral agents, it's not viewed the same way as if you and I were supposed to do.
Yeah, like imagine if a human being lived their life that way. They would not make it more than a couple days.
Well, and they'd be underneath the prison. I mean,
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be running around.
Yeah.
We would so quickly, not just because we have laws, because it's just so intuitive that they're wrong.
Absolutely.
And so I think taking to that extent and not getting hung up on the semantic aspect, well, we called it rape because it's that. Like, no, just the concept, we have deemed this a wrong thing to do.
Right.
Because it is a wrong thing to do to another human being.
Absolutely. And so now let's transition over to the more of the emotional answer of the problem of evil. It is something that we all obviously observe, because it's one thing to know intellectually that evil is wrong and God does not condone evil. But it's another thing on the emotional side when you observe evil, you've had evil happen to you.
Yeah.
Where the question becomes, okay, God, why didn't you stop that from happening to me?
I think that's the big thing. Everyone questions, like, if there is a God, why did this happen to me or to a group of people?
Well, sure, and then your options become, God, do you not care? Were you not able to stop it? You know, and that's when you kind of segue over into the different worldviews as far as Christianity, Islam.
Yeah, what do they have to say?
What do they have to say about it? And the Christian worldview has something very interesting to say about it, because not only does it make it very well known that God sees evil, it also makes it known that God is first of all, he detests evil, but also that he did something about evil. And also he experienced evil himself in the person of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ came on this earth as God in human form and lived a sinless life, yet suffered and had evil done to him. So God, from an experiential standpoint, understands bad things happening to good people. And that's a really big deal. Because he identifies with evil and suffering from an experiential standpoint, not just from an intellectual standpoint of I understand that this happened to you. No, he understands. No, I had it happen to me. God understands experientially unfair treatment.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's a big thing to consider.
Yeah, exactly. But not just that. Even beyond that. Not only did he have that happen to him, the reason he had it happen to him, right? And the reason he had it happen to him was because of our sin, and because of our unrighteousness. And so Jesus dies on the cross and takes a punishment that's not even due him, that's due us.
Yeah, so he's completely innocent, taking someone else's punishment. In fact, a lot of people's punishment.
Once again, you talk about bad things happening to good people.
Right? That's a bad weekend he had.
Yeah, a really rough weekend, right? And so, so from a experiential standpoint, that's what makes the God of Christianity unique.
Absolutely.
In that way, is that not only does this God intellectually understand evil, he understands it experientially, because he humbled himself and became a human being, and experienced it with us, and at our hands. Also, right?
Yeah.
But
and I think the most beautiful thing about that is the concept of, even through all of that, he had every right to be angry. Cuss us out is probably what I'd be doing. Let's be honest, man. Jeez, that sounds terrible. And yet, the gospel document that he says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do."
Amazing behavior under those circumstances.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
And so I don't know how more sympathetic you can get than that.
Absolutely.
Where in the height of his pain and suffering on the cross, he's interceding on behalf of us for the ones that are torturing him.
Absolutely.
I think I can't think of a better representation to understand or to showcase, I should say, that God does care and is right there with us.
Absolutely, and he doesn't just leave it there either. The even more beautiful part than that about that experience was 3 days after the fact of him rising from the dead,
Mm-hmm.
he provided a way for us as human beings to have a way out of evil and suffering one day, and death itself not being the end,
Right.
because for, as we know, for the follower of Christ, death is not the end actually.
Absolutely.
And so the beautiful thing about it, is that in an ultimate sense, Christ promised that he was going to come back again one day, and he was going to address evil for good.
Right.
And he was going to eradicate evil for good, which is part of that's what hell is. Hell is part of God's solution to the problem of evil. And that's really good news, because at the end of the day, if Christianity is the true worldview to have, then evil loses.
Absolutely.
And good.
In fact, I'm pretty sure the Bible says that evil already lost
Yes.
after the cross. And I think that's a really interesting thing. Like, the game's already won.
Exactly.
So I think that's really interesting. I think the concepts of hell, is God good if there is a hell, the problem of evil, really diving into these could be whole episodes.
And
so
they,
I don't want to get
they
too
will be.
stuck. Yeah.
They
I
will
think
be.
there's so much to unpack.
Yeah. We'll have a complete episode dedicated to the problem of evil. But
absolutely.
that's more of the emotional answer to the problem of evil. Is that God is not apathetic, or nor is he sitting there and not doing anything about the problem of evil. That he addressed it head on, and has been and addressed it head on from when it first showed up.
Yeah, and he's right there with us right now.
And right there with us. And so that's what I would say are the two, pieces of evidence for the problem of evil as it relates to there being a God.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to consider there. And I guess the last thing that I would bring up on my end. Now, this is one you really don't hear a lot. Right. I was actually doing some research before, and I haven't really seen any professional philosophers or apologists, which is for those who don't know, is a fancy term for just people defending Christianity in the faith.
That's all it is.
That's all it really is. No one's apologizing. In fact, when I first learned what an apologist is, I walk in on this guy. He's like, "Oh, I'm watching an apologetics video." I'm like, "Man, what's going on at home? You got to learn how to apologize? You could have talked to me. I'm great at it."
I've never been good at communicating. So got to watch apologetics videos.
But this concept of desire. So when we look at life, when I'm hungry, there's a satisfaction for that desire. There's food.
Sure.
When I have sexual urges, well, there is a satisfaction for said desire. There's sex.
Right.
And so pretty much every desire that we have, there is something on this earth to fulfill it. But there is these sort of transcendent or spiritual almost desires that we have that on a naturalistic worldview do not really get accounted for. I think there's three main things you could really say, but this longing for a better or perfect place. We've tried to suffice that with this sort of Marxist perspective of utopia and trying to make a better place on earth. But I think belonging to something greater and trying to connect with something transcendent beyond us. I mean, if you look at a musician, half the time, I'd say most of the time, honestly, when they're playing, you see them closing their eyes, and they're not just trying to focus. If you talk to a lot of musicians, they're really trying to connect to something beyond themselves. And then that's a vessel, that music, and a lot of even just music listeners, they use it as a vessel to almost escape the natural reality in front of them and connect to something transcendent. And also, I think the ultimate thing is true fulfillment. I, as someone who used to have an issue with drugs and gluttony and stuff like that, I tried to fulfill myself by filling myself with stuff.
Right. Right.
And there really isn't an end to that. I tried so many external physical things to try to fill this sort of hunger that I had within me.
Sure.
And there really wasn't a fulfillment for that outside of Christ. Now, this is a more artistic piece of evidence or transcendent sort of desire concept.
Yeah,
it's a little more abstract.
Sure, I understand what you're saying, but I think that you're onto something with that, because when you study anthropology, wherever you have a civilization of people, you have people within that civilization that are asking the 4 questions that I asked earlier. Why am I here?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's the purpose to life? How should I
Yeah.
live while I'm here? What's going to happen when I die? Is there an afterlife?
Mm-hmm.
I think that
And it's
people
funny
have
that those 4 main things, however you word them, pop up for everyone.
they pop
And
up for
it's
everyone.
almost like a spiritual or emotional roadmap to try to question and seek God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that could get into the whole divine hiddenness concept and why God has somewhat hidden himself.
Oh, by the way, I made a mistake with those 4 questions. The first one is how did I get here?
Oh, how did I get here?
Not
Sure.
why the second one is why am I here? The first one is how did I get here?
Sure.
Yeah.
But the concept of using these sort of questions that are almost ingrained in the human to seek God, I think is really fascinating. Like I have these sort of desires, like those 4 questions, or longing for a deeper fulfillment of my life, not just a career, not just a wife and something like that.
Sure.
A connection to something transcendent and great, something beautiful, and a longing for something better or borderline perfect.
Sure.
In general, and the 2 main things we do on a naturalistic worldview is we suppress it. That's one of the most common ones, and it's probably the more convenient one, maybe
Sure.
not the happiest.
Sure.
Maybe you dip into some nihilism and say just, well, nothing's true, or you just kind of, whatever, those are more pipe dreams, kid things, you know what I
Right.
mean? And then the other concept is the classic question, if only I.
Right.
And then you fill in the blank, then I would be happy.
If only I hit the jackpot. If only I
married her, or
married him,
took that
or,
job.
Yeah, I got you. If only I had this car, if only I made this much money a year,
then I would be fulfilled. I would be connected to that thing that I long for.
Oh, you know what that sounds like?
Huh.
The pursuit of happiness.
Oh, interesting.
That's what that sounds like.
Okay.
That's what it sounds like to me, at least. It sounds
Sure.
like the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
If I can get to that 6-figure job, with that office, with the city view and the $500,000 house,
Sure.
with the,
then I'll be happy.
yeah, with the 5 bedrooms, the 3-car garage, the white picket fence, the dog, the kids,
Yeah.
the beautiful wife, and then that's it.
And the funny thing is, if you look at like millionaires today and you ask them, like, what's your goal? The really successful ones, they said to get more. They're going to keep going. There isn't really an end. The end is to keep getting richer, and you get to a point where you just keep accumulating more and more wealth. And so if the goal is some sort of finite place in your life, you're going to find out, oh, I can go a little bit farther. And you're going to keep reaching for these physical, material things when in necessity, it seems like if the material things that you're ascertaining aren't fulfilling this sort of transcendent desire that you have within you, perhaps the material things were never meant to fulfill you to begin with.
Ah.
And so actually C.S. Lewis kind of inspired me to kind of think about this. I kind of borrowed from his book, Mere Christianity. Shout out C.S. Lewis.
He's a cool guy.
Yeah. But yeah, when I read that, it just kind of made me think about that sort of desire concept, and I feel like no one really touches really a lot of base on, because that was those questions, I think, on an intuitive level, when I was an atheist and agnostic, kind of going back and forth, these were a lot of these things that I was thinking about. And so I was looking at like Eastern spirituality and New Age stuff, and looking at other religions and things like that, and trying to see like what fits the evidence I currently have, trying to find new evidence and everything. Side note, Christianity was one of the last ones that I investigated. And right away I was like, ha, this will be easy. This one's dumb. And then I started kind of like attending churches and looking at the evidence. And I was like, oh man, this is a little different than I thought. Now look where I'm at now. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Wasn't so easy, was it?
Yeah, I guess not. But so there's a little fun fact about me.
All right.
But yeah, I mean, that's the main thing that I kind of think about with the whole desire concept. Just to briefly summarize, for all these material things or natural inclinations that we have, for a sexual desire, there's sex; for hunger, there's food. There's a lot of these sort of transcendent things, the big 4 questions: fulfillment, connection to a transcendent source or concept or place that just does not get fulfilled in any way from a material thing here on Earth.
Right. Yeah, that's good. And then final piece of evidence for me that there is a God is rational minds. That's the last one for me.
Okay.
Reason being is because I observe about myself and about others that we have rational minds.
You do?
Yes,
Oh, I didn't know.
we have minds.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Don't mind if
and
I do.
right, in these minds inform us about the reality of life going on around us.
Yeah.
Things going on the inside of us. We're feeling all of these different things.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question for me becomes, where did my rational mind come from? And the laws of logic that I use and reason. Where do these things come from?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, where do these things come from? What's the origin of reason? What's the origin of the laws of logic? What's the origin of my mind?
Yeah.
And as I think about it, I really got two options. Either my mind is the byproduct of a transcendent mind, or my mind is the byproduct of primordial slime evolved to a higher order.
And then the thoughts that you're having, in a sense, are just chemical reactions responding to stimulus that you're receiving.
Exactly. But then the question with that becomes is, if my brain is essentially a highly developed monkey's brain, why should I trust my brain to tell me the truth about reality?
Yeah, what makes it reliable?
What makes it reliable? As a matter of fact, Charles Darwin said, would you trust the thoughts of a monkey? I wouldn't. And so he was struggling with epistemological nihilism at the time. But that does kind of get you thinking in a way. Like if that's the case, if there is no mind prior to the human mind, what are my thoughts, my reason, logic?
Yeah.
What's it grounded in?
Yeah.
If there's no transcendent mind, if our mind is the mind, then essentially these thoughts that we have aren't really trustworthy.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because if on a naturalistic worldview you come to the conclusion that atheism is true, but you don't have any good reason to believe that your thoughts are reliable,
You don't.
how can the argument against God be reliable?
If you use thought to come to this
Yeah,
argument,
so
and come
you
to
almost
this
have
conclusion.
you almost can't use thought to disprove God if you're going to have a naturalistic point of view, because you have no reason to believe that your thoughts are reliable and trustworthy.
Right, and that's what C.S. Lewis said, right?
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, it was C.S. Lewis who even brought that up, that you can't use thought to disprove God, because essentially what you're using is you're borrowing from God, you're borrowing from the transcendent mind to say that there's no transcendent mind.
Yeah, stealing from God to make your case against him, sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's the last piece of evidence for me. It makes it's more reasonable. It makes more sense with my experience of life to believe that our minds are the byproduct of a transcendent mind, than to believe my mind is nothing more than primordial slime evolved to a higher order.
Absolutely.
In which case, I have no reason to trust my thoughts regarding anything.
Yeah, and I think another thing to consider is if we look at it from a specifically naturalistic worldview, your brain evolved only to survive.
Right.
Not really to come to intellectual thought and to perceive truth if there really isn't a transcendent reality or transcendent source to kind of ground reality, to grant that your mind is reliable, has a reliable form of way to interpret reality.
Sure.
And so if you've only developed to survive, your thoughts are going to be centered around the concept of survival. And so if you deemed that atheism would make you more liable to survive, that doesn't really make it true. That just means that it's better equipped to survive, in a sense. Again, so it would all be in line with what's best to survive, not what is true about reality. And I think that's a big thing to really consider.
Yeah, it's a big thing. And then you run into questions like, if that's the case, what are things like love?
Right.
What is justice? What are things like
is love? I think love would be a great one just to stick on, because I mean, do you choose to love your girlfriend or wife, or is that just chemicals happening in your brain and you're just kind of rolling?
Yeah, I'm just kind of responding to the chemical reactions in my mind. As a married man myself, I find that very hard to believe.
Yeah, absolutely.
I find that doesn't jive with my experience of love.
Irrational.
right? But it doesn't jive with my experience of reality whatsoever. That's what
Yeah.
love is that I'm responding to the chemical reactions in my mind. It appears to me that love is far more than that. But like I said, then you run into questions like, what are things like justice? What is truth?
Yeah.
If there's no mind prior to the human mind,
Well, that's just your truth, man.
whatever that is,
Right.
I haven't defined it.
Right. Exactly.
So, so that's
but
what
these things like justice, truth, love, you kind of have to drop all that on a naturalistic framework.
you have to.
Otherwise, they're just kind of fake concepts, and especially the concept of love. The Bible even says that God is love, and so I think that's in like the first letter of John.
Yeah.
And so that concept of God being that transcendent source that where love is actually derivative from, we have a clear foundation with where that's laid. But on a naturalistic framework, love is just a chemical that pops in your brain when you see someone that is attractive to you or is someone that was your offspring, and so you have some sort of chemical reaction that happens and you decide to act on that favorably because it helps you to survive or it makes your existence more comfortable.
And even then, you can't. Why would you once again trust your thought that this person's going to help you to survive?
Yeah.
That makes
And so
sense.
I think you keep hitting that wall where you can't really live that out, where you intellectually you can have that perspective, but it's very challenging to live out.
Yeah, it is. It's very challenging. But those are my pieces of evidence for God. And you got anything else to add?
That's it, man. I think 8's a good solid number.
I think so.
Of course, there are several dozen,
Dude, it's
for this stuff.
Way too many.
There's like free will. Of course, I'm drawing a blank on the rest of them.
Yeah, it's a bunch of order and design. I mean, we got into some of this stuff.
Yeah,
we got into a little bit because a lot of them kind of bleed over. But I think that's pretty much it for this episode, man. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure that you follow us on Facebook as well. Thank you guys for joining us for this first episode. Be on the lookout for more content. Thanks and God bless.